Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Renos. The more we dig into the World Development Report 2025 on standards for development, the more it says about how people think and act. It calls standards the invisible infrastructure of the economy. That stuck with me. We obsess over roads and power grids, but we rarely talk about the rules that make them work.
That is exactly right. It is a perfect metaphor. Think about it. Without standards, a plug does not fit into a socket. A bolt does not fit a nut. The report breaks it down into three critical functions: measurement, which gives us consistency; compatibility, so things work together; and quality, which ensures safety.
It sounds straightforward, but the report mentions a paradox, something about a spaghetti bowl.
Yes, the spaghetti ball. It describes the current global landscape. For some products, we have this tangled mess of overlapping voluntary standards. But then, for high stakes technologies like artificial intelligence, we have significant gaps. It is too much in some places and not nearly enough in others.
That sounds like a headache for businesses. But let's look at the upside. When we get this right, it's not just about convenience, it's a massive economic driver.
Massive is the word. Here's the part that really surprised me. Consider the shipping container. Just by standardizing that metal box, trade among advanced economies jumped by 1,240% over 15 years.
Wait, over 1,200%? Just from a standardized box?
Yes, that exceeds the combined effect of all trade agreements in the previous half century. And today, technical non tariff measures, which are often linked to quality standards, affect nearly 90% of world trade. Back in the late 90s, that was only 15%.
So if you're a developing country, you can't really opt out. You have to play the game.
You do, and playing the game pays off. Firms in low and lower middle income countries that adopt these international standards actually report greater sales premiums than firms in high income countries. It's a differentiator.
I saw the example of Tunisia in the report. It wasn't just about local companies trying harder, it was about foreign direct investment, right?
Precisely. In Tunisia's automotive components sector, foreign investments brought in ISO 9001 and environmental standards. It forced the local ecosystem to upgrade. The result? That sector has seen 10% annual growth since 2010.
Okay, so that's the why, but the how seems tricky. The report outlines a trajectory for policymakers: adapt, align, author. Can we unpack that?
It is the roadmap. First, adapt. When a country is at an early stage of development, it should adapt international standards to local realities if that's needed. You don't want to just copy and paste if you can't implement it.
Right, like the example of standards for pesticide levels on fruit and vegetables.
Exactly. We all want to eat fruit that is free from pesticides, but the reality is that achieving low levels requires not only expertise, but also access to testing laboratories. There are often not yet enough of such laboratories available in low and middle income countries. Adapting international standards to domestic capacities is therefore crucial. But as capacity grows, you move to align. You want your domestic rules to match international norms so you don't have friction in trade.
And then the final stage is author.
Yes, eventually you want a seat at the table setting global roles. China is the prime example here. They transitioned from a standard taker to a standard maker. Experts from China are increasingly represented at international standards development bodies like the ISO. Their contributions to international standards jumped from 13 before the year 2000 to 182 in 2015.
That sounds great for China, but here's a friction point I noticed. The report highlights a huge participation gap. Low income countries participate in only 7% of active ISO technical committees. High income countries, 84%.
It is a stark disparity. And it is not just about showing up to meetings. The differences also show when you look at the implementation of standards. Many standards rely on testing and certification. This is called the quality infrastructure. You can think of it as the plumbing underlying many standards. Without laboratories, standards are often not as effective.
The numbers there were rough. Ethiopia has fewer than 100 accredited auditors for ISO standards. Germany has 12,000.
And that scarcity has a cost. For a firm in a developing country, compliance with standards and cost up to 425,000 US dollars. That's a fortune.
Yeah, that's a barrier to entry that shuts small businesses out completely. So the recommendation is for governments to build this infrastructure?
They must sequence it, and it is not only the task of the government. The private sector also plays a key role. Start with public provision for the high stakes stuff, health and safety. Then, as the market matures, transition to a more private sector approach, for example, for testing laboratories. Because if you don't have the plumbing, the standards are just paper.
Speaking of health and safety, this is where the report shifted gears for me. We usually think of standards as industrial, screws, containers, microchips, but the report argues they're critical for public goods, like healthcare.
This is, I think, the most human part of the findings. Process standards save lives. Just a list of steps to follow. It is the power of consistency. Globally, the WHO's Safe Surgery Checklist had a significant impact, reducing deaths by 47% and complications by 36% in pilot hospitals. But the tragedy is that 60% of deaths in low and middle income countries stem from conditions that are treatable. The issue is not the lack of medicine, it is the lack of high quality, standardized care.
It's the same story in education, isn't it? I read about Sierra in Brazil.
Sierra is a brilliant success story. They set clear literacy benchmarks and standards for teacher practice. In less than 2 decades, their education quality index score jumped from 3.2 to 7.7. They achieved near universal literacy by grade 2.
But there's a catch, right? You can't just raise the bar on paper.
Correct. Look at Pakistan. They required higher qualifications for teachers, a higher standard on paper. But student learning outcomes did not improve. Why? Because the actual practice inside the classroom did not change. Standards must change behavior, not just resumes.
That connects to the environmental section too. We have these de jure standards, what the law says, and de facto standards, what actually happens. And with air quality, that gap is literally killing people.
It is. 99% of the global population lives in areas exceeding WHO air quality guidelines. Meeting those guidelines could add nearly 2 years to global life expectancy. But in lower income countries, there is a massive compliance gap.
So, how do you close that gap without spending billions on new enforcement agencies immediately? The report mentions something about transparency acting as a standard.
Yes, this is a clever policy lever. When US embassies began monitoring and tweeting air quality data in various cities, it created public pressure. Pollution levels in those cities dropped by 2 to 4 micrograms per cubic meter because governments had to respond. Information itself became the standard.
That's fascinating. It's like once you measure it and show it to people, you can't ignore it.
Exactly. And that transparency applies to governance too. In Ghana, they found that 1/3 of local government projects, schools, roads, are never completed. They just stop.
And most people assume that's corruption, right? Someone pocketed the money?
Most people assume that, yes, but the data shows it is largely organizational mismanagement. It is a failure of standards in organizational governance. When you look at recruitment, for example, merit based hiring varies wildly. Within the same government, some agencies hire 100% based on merit, others only 20%.
So, standardized processes could fix that.
They can. In Punjab, Pakistan, they introduced performance pay standards for tax collectors. Just by standardizing incentives, revenue collection increased by approximately 40% in 2 years.
That's a huge return on investment. Okay, so we've covered trade, health, environment, and government. But looking forward, the report sounds a bit of an alarm bell regarding transformational technologies like AI, biotechnology, or cybersecurity.
You are right. In some areas, innovation is moving faster than regulation, and when gaps appear, consumers face risks they never signed up for. The global community has to agree on credible standards for breakthrough technologies before consumers are left unprotected. We need that invisible infrastructure to be built before the house falls down.
It really changes how you view development. It's not just about pouring money at a problem, it's about building the framework, the measurement, the compatibility, the quality checks that lets the system run itself.
That is the key message. Standards are the bridge between ambition and reality. Whether it is a shipping container or a surgeon's checklist, getting the rules right allows countries to move from just surviving to truly thriving. It empowers people to trust the products they buy, the air they breathe, and the governments they serve. Over to you, Renos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.